I wanted to focus a little bit on the 2005 National Research Council study on your industry. Could you explain the conclusion of that study? But just push that button.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Congressman Royce. And for anybody else, I have a copy of the executive summary here. It's interesting, when I came into the industry previously in the telecommunications sector, and having lived and worked in Europe and been in China quite a bit, I had the benefit of having a recently completed study that was put together by a broad group of participants, including members from the DoD, from academia, from industry. And it was a study entitled Manufacturing Trends in Electronics Interconnect Technology, which specifically focused on the interconnect technology embedded in the circuit boards. The conclusions there were simply that given the state of the industry and the migration of the commercial markets to Southeast Asia, China in particular, and back in 1984, as a matter of fact, 42% of the global market was serviced out of U.S. factories. Today, over 40% of the market is serviced by Chinese factories, and our market share here is about 6%. So we've seen a massive migration, the impact of which has been fairly devastating to the industry. The ability, there are several critical concerns that they cite. One, the ability to continue to fund research and development, both for today as well as for the future. The ability to continue to meet the requirements of the defense industry to build their products, both today and in the future. And it put forth a few recommendations. Unfortunately, I have to report that it has had little, if any, attention since then. The study was completed, I think, in 2004, but published in 2005. So it highlighted the critical concern that, again, we may need to go into foreign countries to source, important elements of our supply chain, like cited here. But certainly the circuit boards, not being a component per se, they're commonly referred to as components, but every circuit board is unique. It has the electrical blueprints, if you will, of the device and how it works. And not to have a defense industrial base to support our requirements is really what the report focused on, and made several recommendations about how to go forward.
Well, I think in your testimony you said the health of the U.S. defense industrial base generally does not factor into export controls. My question is, should it, and how should it, if the answer is yes? And what can we learn from your industry?
Well, specifically, let me reiterate that the IPC, and DDI as well, supports export control reform, and we support opening the global markets more liberally to our manufacturers here in the States. My understanding is the export control reform is focused on the export reform controls, and other issues such as sustaining a defense industrial base might be effectively addressed through other initiatives, whether they're coming out of the Department of Defense or elsewhere. It has sat for quite some time not part of the export control reform, so maybe there could be some linkages to connect the issues, but I understand that that's not the primary motivation behind export control reforms, and we do agree that the reforms need to be streamlined, made more efficient, and enabling of our members at the IPC and my customers at DDI to be able to sell into the global markets in a manner that's appropriate.
But in the meantime, you've mentioned that the current export control rules are ambiguous regarding printed circuit boards. Of course, that ambiguity is a problem throughout the system. But you've had meetings, I suspect, with export control officials to lay out the case of what's happening here. Do they fully understand your industry? And what could we do here to try to make certain that that industry doesn't dissolve here in the United States?
Good question. One of the problems with printed circuit boards is that they get mentally lumped in with other components. screws, nuts, bolts. And in fact, we've met with Department of Commerce, and as we talked to them, I realized that as an example, there's many in government who don't really understand what the circuit board is. In fact, I'll hold up an example here. This is a circuit board. They look fairly routine, not unlike anything you'd find in your laptop or BlackBerry or anything else, but really this includes the schematic design of the electrical device or component or part. So again, it's not a general component. And so getting everybody to understand that has been a huge effort of ours. I don't think that we're finished yet, but that's part of why I'm here, and we'd continue to do that. I think as people in government and commerce or the Department of Defense or elsewhere start to realize that this is really the schematic design of the device, it's from which something can be easily copied. It's how we begin to lose our proprietary intellectual property. I think that it can start to be understood that it needs to be viewed differently than screws and nuts and bolts and things like that. So,
thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Royce.
Thank you, Madam Chair.